And their vision was a separate state for black people in America. That there's no preference of an Arab over a non-Arab. You don't take a knife and stick it in my back 9 inches deep, pull it back 6 inches and say there's progress. And then he tells them that my fruit of Islam are not going to leave this place until we see him. This is, for me, the 5th in the series of Islamic history and the icons of Islamic struggle and examples for our ummah. And of all the people I've to speak about this time round, Malcolm X, as he is known, played a significant role in my own practice and return to Islam. In 1991, I bought this book myself, and I had no idea what it was about. I literally went into a bookstore in Birmingham High Street, and I saw a picture of this man, and I noticed that he had a ring on, and on the ring was an Islamic symbol. So I was intrigued. I really didn't know who he was. And as it happened, as time went on, and when I read his autobiography, I thought, first of all, this is about some kind of a gangster, as I myself had been in gangs, and I was attracted to the idea of gangsters and people who portrayed themselves in a particular way. But then as I continued to study the book and came to the point at which, of course, he becomes a Muslim, but I don't recognize the nation of Islam, even as somebody who wasn't necessarily practicing so well. I didn't recognize that kind of Islam, because that kind of Islam would, by necessity, exclude me. But when I saw his transformation, and the story of Malcolm X is about repeated transformation and growing, from orphan to gangster to hustler to earning the nickname Satan, to embracing a version of Islam which Islam rejects, to rejecting his teacher, and to embracing Islam and rejecting the racism that was born out of racism. I often think of Malcolm X as one of the most influential people in modern times. I've spoken about people like Imam Shamil, Abdul Karim al-Khattabi, Zainab al-Ghazali, and Omar al-Mukhtar, who were great people in their own rights. But I don't think in our modern times there's been anybody as influential as Malcolm X, and this evening it's my honor to try to explain why. But before I begin, I just want you to listen to this excerpt from a very old speech that Malcolm X gave at the Oxford Union.
And love his enemy, no matter what kind of attack, be it verbal or otherwise, he's supposed to take it. But if he stands up and in any way tries to defend himself, then he's an extremist. And if I'm wrong, then you're a racist.
When he spoke at the Oxford Union, you know that Oxford University is one of the most prestigious universities in the world. It reminded me of Malcolm X when he said that he was once in Harvard University, the top university in the world. And he was having a debate there with professors about the issue of race. And those professors couldn't defeat him in a debate. Yet Malcolm X had never even finished school, let alone have a college degree or a university degree. He said, I was standing there having this debate with these men, or sitting there having this debate, and I was looking outside the window and I saw the place where I used to sell drugs on the corner. And There you see him speaking in the Oxford Union, where there are no dark-skinned people, let alone blacks or Muslims, at the time when he's speaking. And they're giving him a standing ovation. Because he later speaks about how he believes in Islam and how Islam is his religion, all the pillars of Islam. He explains that that is his faith. But he also explains that he's a black man in America. And in a period of time where they have what's known as the Jim Crow laws in the South, which means separate facilities, separate public facilities for blacks and whites. They call it coloreds only, or blacks only and whites only, including on the buses, including in public places, including in bars, including in restaurants. You name the place, they're segregated. And what he says is that at the time in South Africa, where the South African apartheid government openly said that blacks and whites cannot mix, blacks are inferior, that was in their law. That's why Nelson Mandela went to prison, because he physically fought, I'm talking about with armed struggle, fought against apartheid. And yet America at that time said, no, we are all equal under the law, except for some. So he pointed out that difference. And it's important you know the history. Malcolm X's father, who you see here pictured, is known as Earl Little. So Malcolm, when he was first born, he was called Malcolm Little. And his mother was called Louise. His mother came originally from Grenada. She was West Indian. And she used to tell him something as a child that he remembered throughout his life. Never eat pork. It is a filthy creature. Never eat pork. He learned that from his childhood. Though they had no connection to Islam or anything, but that was one strand that continued through generations, through hundreds of years. Perhaps the entirety of Islam was lost from the slaves that had been taken from West Africa, many of whom were originally Muslims. If you read the history of this region, you'll find the history of slavery, you'll find that many were Muslims originally, and they were dragged from their homes and taken, about 4 million of them, on these slave ships. Many of them died, millions of them died on the way there. But even then, when they arrived onto the American land and when they came into the American soil, whether that was North America or South America, in places like Brazil and elsewhere, the Muslims were the most prized prisoners and they were the most hostile and most rebellious. Why? They were the most prized because they were the most educated. One report in a book called Servants of Allah describes how Umar, a slave called Umar, wrote his slave master's inventory, all of the property that he owned in his farm, in Arabic, because his slave master was illiterate. He could not read or write. In a place called Bahia in the 1800s in Brazil, where we don't often hear about the slaves who were sent to South America or Central America. We hear about America, or the USA as it's called. The Muslims led a revolt in a place called Bahia, where they literally fought against their slave owners and managed to capture for a while a little village until they were beaten and slaughtered. So Earl Little was around this period of time. He followed a man called Marcus Garvey. Marcus Garvey, for those who probably have never heard of him, started a movement called the Black Star Line. It was the Back to Africa movement. He said, now he believed in black nationalism. It wasn't about Islam. But he believed that because of the treatment of black people in America, that they should all try to get out of the United States and go back to Africa. And that's why you have places, for example, in West Africa, Freetown, which is the capital of the West Africa, I think Sierra Leone is the capital of, this is where slaves would go back once they've been freed, managed to either buy their way out of freedom or escape and go back. Liberia, a place where they were liberated. is the name of a country in West Africa. Libreville, all of these places mentioned and named because slaves escaped and went back to Africa. But of course, as you know, for the majority it was not possible to go back to Africa. But what they had to deal with, remember this is a period, Malcolm X is born, which we'll see in a moment, in 1925. What was happening in the rest of the world at that time, if you recall, that the Battle of Anwar had happened and Abdul Karim al-Khattabi had defeated the largest force of colonial occupiers in history. That was the same year, or just around the same year when Malcolm X was born. And what his father and the generations after the American Civil War had to deal with was an offshoot of the South in America, which was the Ku Klux Klan. And many of these were members of the former military of the South who still wanted to treat blacks in a particular way, discriminate against them, and believed in slavery. And they called themselves, even after that time, which is a strange name, the Invisible Empire. They have an empire, but it's invisible, you can't see. The Knights of the Ku Klux Klan. And they would wreak havoc on black communities, particularly in the South. Their symbol was the burning cross to show the wrath of God against black people. They were marching in places like Washington, D.C. in 1925 in their thousands. So their numbers have dwindled over the years, but they had hundreds of thousands of members. And these are the sorts of things that they instigated. This is the period of time when Malcolm X was born and was growing up. The idea of lynching, where you accuse somebody of a crime, there is no court process, you literally either drag them from their homes or from the jail before they've been charged or prosecuted, and you take them into the street, you find a lamppost or a post, you string up a rope and you hang them by their neck. This happened to at least 4,743 people between these years, from 1882 to 1968. I was born in 1968. And people would attend these lynchings in their tens of thousands. And it wouldn't be just women, just men, women too. This picture on the right is 6 men hanged together. The photograph was damaged, so they had to recolor it, but it is essentially a picture of 6 men hanged together in Georgia in 1916. This is the reason why I'm showing you these photographs, so you have an idea. Look at these people standing, they're happy to be photographed when they've just lynched people. There's 3 people being lynched here, one behind that you can't see. And this was in Minnesota. This is another one, a place called Marion, Indiana. 2 people, 1930. Malcolm X was 5 years old when this happened. And you see here, he was born, as I said, Malcolm Little, 19th of May, 1925. The family were poor, and he says that when they were young, they wanted to eat food. They were so hungry, they were dizzy. Their mother would sometimes boil weeds, dandelions, and give them that to eat. And one of the things that happened to his father very early on, before he reached this age here in this photograph, is that his father was murdered by a group called the Black Legion. They found his body on the railway tracks. They said it was an accident, a car accident, but he was laid on the tracks. And that's because, as I said, he was a follower of Marcus Garvey. He believed in separation. He believed in going back to Africa. He believed that you need to speak up against the abusers. And so he was chased by the Ku Klux Klan, and they believed that he was murdered. His mother, as a result, lost her mind, and she was sent to a sanitarium, which means a mental asylum, at a very early age. So him and his brother and sisters, were all placed in different places, in care, in orphanages at a very early age. So you can see the trauma that starts already in Malcolm X's life, and the direction where he's going to go, it's almost obvious. He did well at school. Despite all of that, you can see at the top row, 1, 2, 3, fourth from the right. There's only one black kid in this photograph. That's Malcolm as a child. He was very bright, very intelligent. But his teachers thought that he needs to know his place. So once he said that when he grows up, he wants to become a lawyer. And the teacher replied that that's no realistic goal for the, I'm not going to say the word. Why don't you plan on carpentry? So that's the encouragement he was getting from his peers, compared to his peers. So he grew and he drifted different parts of America, starting in Lansing, Michigan, and then moving on to Detroit, which is a bit further away from there. My geography of America isn't so good. But that's the name he started to earn for himself, because he was, to look at him, a very handsome man. But he says there's a reason for his skin complexion, even that. Why don't I look? Why did his mother, she looked white? It's because her mother's mother was raped by a white man on a plantation in Grenada, in the West Indies. And that was common. It was common to rape the slave girls and then to give them the slave master name. So that's why he was called Malcolm Little. And he understood that, though many people didn't. In 1944, so what he started to do is getting involved in crime, in petty crime. He wasn't a big gangster, but he was a gangster. He was involved in something known as the numbers racket, which is essentially a gambling scheme. He was involved in theft. He was involved in extortion, and even some worse things than that. So he was involved in all of that. And as a result of his behavior and the direction he was going in, though he was highly, highly intelligent, extraordinarily intelligent, he was a gangster, a small-time petty criminal gangster. And that landed him into prison. He'd been in trouble with the law a few times, but eventually in 1944, they gave him an 8-year sentence for a crime that he committed alongside a couple of white women. Now, those white women got off completely free. Him and his friend, Shorty, were given sentences that were far greater than for the crime, or was proportioned for the crime that he committed, but that was not surprising considering the treatment of black people in prisons in America, which still exists in a massively disproportionate way. So in prison, out of the 8-year sentence, he spends 6.5 years. And in the beginning, he is, even in prison, he talks about how religion means nothing to him. It's important that we know that at that time, and still now to this day in America, people are far more religious in America than they are in Europe. In Europe, they've completely lost it. Europe is one of the worst when it comes to any kind of belief. Atheism in Europe is on the rise and continues. A recent report found that the majority of people in the UK, meaning not Muslims, don't identify with any religion. But America's not like that. America's a place where religion is important. Still on the dollar note they have, "In God we trust." And yet Malcolm, though he'd been brought up by parents who were religious, his father, after all, was a minister. And his mother used to tell him to at least try to remember God. He didn't care. And because of his rejection of religion, he earned the nickname Satan. That was his nickname in prison. So people would go to the chapel often. People would go and do communion and so all that sort of stuff. But he was adamant that religion to him, he had no thought or ideas about religion. You can see his hair. Even the likening of his hair and trying to make his hair combable in that way, to be as European or Western looking as possible, was part of the what he calls the psychological, the defeatism within him when he was like this. Even his criminality was all about trying to emulate his oppressor. Get rich quick. Until he met, there's two things that happened. One is that he had a half sister. So his father had a wife from a previous marriage called Ella Collins. She embraced Islam, the Islam of the Nation of Islam. And she started to talk to him about this religion. And also in prison, he met members of the Nation of Islam. And now it's important we understand the Nation of Islam for a moment. The Nation of Islam is an organization that began in the 1920s. And a man called W. Fard claimed to be Allah. And then he came and taught a man called Elijah Muhammad, who claimed to be the messenger of Allah. And they claim to have, and then this Fard guy, whoever he just disappears. And Elijah Muhammad starts this movement called the Nation of Islam, in which he is the messenger, and the pronunciation is there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger. But who do they mean? They mean Elijah Muhammad. They believe in the Bible. They quote from the Bible as much as they do from the Quran. In fact, they quote little from the Quran because they still know very little of it. They say that Islam is the religion of the black man. They say that the white people are devils, actual devils, and that black people are angels, God's representatives on earth. And so they teach this twisted ideology. And this ideology is based on khurafat, actual mythology that has no basis at all. If you were to read it, you can read a lot more about it afterwards, but suffice to say that the belief of the Nation of Islam according to Islamic principles is kufr right from the beginning. It cannot be accepted as Islam. But there were some benefits in what the Nation of Islam taught. They taught black people who had, many of them in America, the African Americans, had lost any connection to their history. And as a result had lost dignity, were heavily involved in crime, and were trying to emulate their oppressors, including their religion. But Malcolm X says, you know, the other day, it's important that we say this. I was with a group of brothers, including youngsters, and we were asking them what their favorite books were. And a large, significant number of those kids answered, I don't read. I don't read books. And I thought this is one of the most dangerous things I've ever heard in my life, especially for a Muslim, especially for our religion, especially for those who read the Quran, of which the very first verse that was revealed to the Prophet ﷺ was Iqra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq. Read. And Malcolm X says that in prison, see, one of the things that he did in prison was fascinating. Once he embraced the religion of the Nation of Islam, which taught him that you should read, that you should be upright, that if you're a man, you look after your family. If you have children, you take care of them. You be a present father, that marriage is a sacred thing. They did teach things, of course, that were very good. And that you don't turn the other cheek. And they taught him that you must read. And he began to read. You know what the first book he read was? The dictionary. The first book that he read was the dictionary. He attempted to memorize every single word in the dictionary. He'd never even graduated school, as I said, let alone university. Look at the thirst for knowledge. He said, after becoming a Muslim in prison, I read almost everything I could put my hands on in the prison library. And he knew that a change was coming. And that change was based upon reading books. And he said, people don't realize how much a man's life can be changed by one book. And he said later, I knew right there in prison that reading had changed forever the course of my life. Look at that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Allah is the wali of those who believe. He takes them out of darkness and puts them into light. And so he met when he was freed from prison with Elijah Muhammad. And this is Elijah Muhammad. This is a picture of him. He was not a charismatic man. He wasn't a speaker that would draw large crowds, but he was an organizer, and he did give them a vision. So they actually wanted a piece of America that's just for black people. That's what they campaigned for. And they had a voice, and they seemed to be very organized. They had men in uniforms with hats, and they were known as the Fruit of Islam, FOI. Their women were dressed in a type of hijab which goes over the ear, but nonetheless covered in white, and they'd wear white. So you'd see them, they look very distinct. And they presented themselves as a viable option, an alternative for the American black man. And Malcolm had never been a speaker before. But in this moment, when he came out of prison and he met with Elijah Muhammad and the other black Muslims, this is the point at which they recognized his worth. Because when he got onto the podium and started to speak, he captivated audiences like no other speaker in America from the black community. And you can see that they would say, if you look at it on the face of it, there is no God but Allah. If you saw that and said, Allahu Akbar, that's amazing. I want to be with these people. These are the right people to be. And so imagine what it must be for those for the community who hear something as radical when he says, I don't want to work with white people. The only thing I like integrated is my coffee. He was talking in a language that nobody had spoken before, because at the same time, you had Martin Luther King. Dr. Martin Luther King came out with a completely different angle, in which he said, we need to change and bring about change, but through non-confrontational, non-violent activism. His role model was Gandhi. And Malcolm X had a completely different approach. It was very much in your face, telling the Americans and through their own historical perspective what they had done and what the black man has the right to seek. An incident occurred where a young man who was part of the Nation of Islam was taken and beaten by police officers in a police station in New York. Malcolm X showed what organized response to brutality can look like and its consequences. So imagine this, picture this in your head. He goes with a group of people from the Nation of Islam, the Fruit of Islam, his soldiers as they were. They're all dressed in uniform or dressed in suits like this. They march in double file, in two lines, and they go up to the police station. And Malcolm goes in while the others are waiting outside, and he says, where is Brother Johnson? We want to see Brother Johnson. They first deny that he's even in custody. And then he tells them that my Fruit of Islam are not going to leave this place until we see him. So they're standing out in rows. They're standing in rows, but there's a massive crowd building behind them, thousands of people. But they're led by these few organized black Muslims. And they say, we will not leave this place until we get to see Brother Johnson. And eventually they go in, they get to see him, he's beaten up, he arranges for a doctor to come in, the doctor says that he'll be taken care of, and then as they walk away, the chief of police over there says, look at what just happened now. That's just too much power for one man. Too much power. So he was now not in the sights of the FBI and the police. This is the first incident, 1957, 7 years before his death. I think of this statement now. I often said, when the Americans took me to Guantanamo, people often, will say, have you ever been to America? I say, no, I've never been to America. America has been to me. And it's been to a whole bunch of other people who've never been to America. And then I came across this statement. He says, I see America through the eyes of the victim. I don't see any American dream, I see an American nightmare. Because he's talking about all of those people who were literally renditioned, millions of people renditioned and sold into slavery into America, onto American soil. While people are coming from all over the world, from Europe and beyond, to live the American dream, where a pauper can become one of the richest men in the world if he just puts his mind to it. But if you talk to the black people of the United States of America, they say this is no dream we're living the nightmare. Stolen from our homes, stolen from our ancestry, stolen from our language, from our culture, from our religion, from our backgrounds. And this message that Malcolm X delivered around in America, people found it he hit the nail on the head and he struck a nerve. And so there was this conversation about, did Malcolm X preach violence? And he would say, I will be a brother with anybody, I would practice brotherhood with anybody who practices brotherhood with me. But anybody who doesn't want to practice brotherhood with me, I will not do that with him. And if somebody hits me on the cheek, I'm not going to turn the other cheek. And here was another new message. Because prior to this, the messages from other people like Martin Luther King was literally that of, if you read a story and from the 1800s, the 1900s, it's a story called Uncle Tom's Cabin, in which there's a character who, no matter how terribly they treat him, he's a slave, they beat him to the point of death, he never rebels against his master. And so the term Uncle Tom was born, that if you want me to be an Uncle Tom, that means you want me to get beaten and thank my master for doing so. He said concerning non-violence, it's criminal to teach a man not to defend himself when he himself is the constant victim of brutal attacks. So he would say self-defense is our right. And they were saying, if you defend yourselves, if you act in this way, you're extremists. And again, truth-telling. The Prophet ﷺ said, أفضل جهاد كلمة حق عند سلطان جائر. That the best jihad is speaking a word of truth in front of an oppressive ruler. Imagine speaking in front of an entire nation. I came here to tell the truth, and if the truth condemns America, then she stands condemned. This statement is preceded by, I am not anti-American. But I came here to tell the truth, and if the truth condemns America, then she stands condemned. He was actually famous, because of his oratory skills, his ability to deliver the message in short, sharp, sweet statements, highly articulate. They'd say something like, well, things are changing now, the laws are changing now, things are getting better. And this is the sharpness of the man. He responds by saying, you don't take a knife and stick it in my back 9 inches deep, pull it back 6 inches and say there's progress. What sharp wit that he delivers something like this, and completely anybody who's arguing with him or talking about aren't things getting better for you now, this is how he responds. And he'd also say something like, when he's talking to people, so this is the issue of sometimes of the liberals versus the hard or the far right. I have more respect for a man who lets me know where he stands. So now he's talking about people like the KKK and the haters, those who openly hate black people and others. And even if that person's wrong, I have more respect for him than the one who comes up like an angel and is nothing but a devil. He said this at the Oxford Union, again reiterating that he understands and respects even if he disagrees with those who hate and oppose him. But there are others, and unfortunately the experience was that they are the majority, that they smile to your face and, as he says, are nothing but a devil in disguise. He recognized the media. Very important, because he understood at that time there was no social media, and his access to the media was based upon mainstream, and he was mainstream in the sense that everybody wanted to hear. When Malcolm X gives a talk, everybody wants to hear what he's got to say. And this was just the beginning, but he even recognized the media and the power of the media. He said, if you're not careful, the newspapers will have you hating people who are being oppressed and loving the people who are doing the oppressing. Where could you apply that statement to today, subhanAllah? Just think of Palestine. Just think of so many other places, historically, Iraq or Afghanistan. Take this principle and you can apply it to this day. In fact, there's so much of what Malcolm X said that you could apply to this day. And then something else happened. If his profile wasn't big enough, he made da'wah to the Nation of Islam, of course, and was deeply instrumental in the acceptance of Islam, even if it was the Nation of Islam, of Cassius Marcellus Clay, also known to the world as Muhammad Ali. That's why Malcolm X's story is so important to us. I had the pleasure of meeting Muhammad Ali several years ago, just after I bought this book. I bought Muhammad Ali's book, and I waited in the rain about 2 hours just so I could see him for a few moments. And I managed to shake his hand, and by that time he'd got Parkinson's and was not speaking properly. And I shook his hand and I said, "You're the champ." And he looked at me, looking at his friend at the same time, and said, "Did he just call me a tramp?" And then he smiled. But this man did for Islam, through his acceptance of it, what few people have ever done. If you know that on Hollywood Boulevard, there are the stars, the names of all these famous stars throughout history, Hollywood and singers and so forth, all on the floor. You walk on them and literally start. There's one star that is not on the floor. There's one star that's raised and it's up on the wall, and that is the name Muhammad Ali. And the reason why Muhammad Ali said that that name cannot be. If you want my name on the floor, if you want my name on a star, then there's only one condition. The condition it must be on the wall, because the name Muhammad is too sacred for it to be on the floor and for people to tread over its name. So they became very, very close. And this is when Muhammad Ali now is won the Olympics. Then he goes on to win the World Championship. And the one who believes in him more than anybody else and tells him repeatedly that you are like David against Goliath, Dawood against Jalut. These three are all Malcolm X's children. Being held by Muhammad Ali is one of them. So they had a very strong and close relationship until a certain point. As I said, Dr. Martin Luther King was one of the contemporaries of Malcolm X, but they had a different vision. They wanted the same thing, but they had a different direction. They both wanted freedom and rights for black people, but Malcolm's method was far more contentious than Martin Luther's, who, as I said, wanted peace, non-violent liberation. As part of Malcolm's growing, he began to grow literally. Not just was his message getting across to black people, he was getting across to people everywhere. So he was going around and he ended up meeting leaders from around the world. His message was a simple one, but extremely powerful. That the America might talk about freedom and civil rights and human rights and democracy to the rest of the world in the United Nations, but they are an oppressor right at home. And that stung a lot of people. One of the people who also, as I said earlier on, we showed you a picture of him, that she played a significant role in his life of becoming a Muslim, was his sister Ella. In this picture you can see, subhanAllah, before she died, both her legs were amputated. But those are her daughters there with her. And not only did she play a significant role in him joining the Nation of Islam, she played a massive role in him embracing proper Islam. It's from her, because of her, that he went to Mecca. And the story of how he goes to Mecca is fascinating. But one of the reasons why he goes is that she wanted him to go with him, because she now had started to recognize some of the lies and the evil, some of the evil within the story of Elijah Muhammad. which included him fathering several children from 9 different women, young women, that he had not even told anybody about. This wasn't about, oh, I have all these wives. They weren't his wives. They were just girls that he'd slept with and impregnated. And Malcolm, when he did his turn, when he came out, when he changed from Satan to a Muslim, he lived a completely straight life, which again is something I found extraordinary. He did once a day, 1 meal a day. He'd do his prayers every day. He didn't know how to pray until he went to Mecca. But however they were taught to pray, he prayed. He was a very serious man. He never pretended, never lied, never cheated, never stole, never did any of those things that he used to do as soon as he made his transformation. And that's why I said his story, the story of Malcolm X, is transformation. And one of the things that happened is that she, from her love of her brother and desire for him to leave the nation of Islam, she'd wanted to go to Hajj herself, but only had enough money for herself. So she gave him the money to buy the ticket, and she sent her brother instead. And so as a result, he traveled. And everybody in the Arab and the Muslim world and in Africa, especially in North Africa, they'd all heard of Malcolm X. Everybody had heard of him. Who is this man? They knew that he was a Muslim, but when he came to Mecca, and he came to Jeddah and he met with Faisal, and Faisal, I have to say, King Faisal of all the Umara, all the leaders in modern times of Saudi Arabia, this is the one that most of us should respect. The only one you can think of. And you can go into details afterwards, but that's who he sat with, and that's who he spoke to, and that's who arranged for him to physically accept proper Islam, take his Shahada properly, and then be tested before he goes into the city of Mecca and Medina. As you know now, that has changed so much. You don't even need to be a Muslim to go to Medina anymore. And so he traveled, he did the Hajj. He did the Hajj. And he took the name Al-Hajj. He became known as Al-Hajj. And he says that one of the hardest things ever for him when he learned to pray was to pray. And this was back especially when he was Satan transforming into a Muslim. So the hardest things for him was to pray. But here he is, I believe it's in Cairo, that he's praying one of his salawat. As I said, this for him, but once he started to pray, he never turned his back on prayer. He traveled right through, as I said, right through North Africa. He went to Algeria and all these other places, but Nigeria in particular, in 1964. He was granted this label, this title called Omawale, which means literally in Yoruba, the Yoruba language, which is the language of one of the Muslim tribes there, is that the child has come home, that he has returned. And he said that what the Muslim students gave me was one of the highest honors that I've ever received in my life. In this period of time, he traveled right across. He visited Egypt, Lebanon, Morocco, Algeria, and Saudi Arabia, where he, as I said, he did his Hajj. And it's important that we recognize that what did he say? When and how did he change? Because up until this point, he believed that white people were devils. And he said famously that he was praying next to people whose skin was the whitest of white, and eyes were the bluest of blue, and hair was the blondest of blonde. Yet in front of Allah, in front of the Kaaba, in front of this ancient house of the prophets, Abraham and Jesus and Moses, and this religion of all of these great prophets, we are all one. We are equal. We are one brotherhood in the sight of Allah. And he said, I have reformed and must reform my view. I will no longer call white people devils. I will no longer describe people, no longer ascribe to the racist view that I had about people. And in fact, You can see here, literally, if you look at the skin complexion of the people he's praying with, they're white. The places he's visiting, people look white. The color there is a problem of color in the Muslim world, of course there is, but it's nothing like America. And as part of his travels, he came here. I was just driving through Smethwick today. He came here to Birmingham. He came to a particular street called Marshall Street, which is in Smethwick, 1965. This is just a couple of weeks before he's killed. And you can see even how he looks now. He even looks like an Orthodox Muslim. And on that street, white people had, or racist white people rather, particularly the Conservative Party, they had this famous poster: if you want an N-word, nigger as a neighbor, vote Labour. And what they tried to do is get all the white people to buy the houses on this street so no black or Asian people could move in. So he was talking to Asians, he was talking to black people, and his very presence there caused a stir. And this is the kind of things you could see. This is literally, you can see what it says on the wall there. And these are the kind of leafleting that was going on. And when they say colored, that means us. They didn't just put black people by themselves. Colored means us lot. It means anybody who's not white. And one of the things, I'm sorry, I think you can't see that properly, but I'll read it out to you. One of the things that he said about his understanding of Islam was this massive change, because he said this now at press conferences. If white Americans would accept the religion of Islam, if they would accept the oneness of God, of Allah, then they could also sincerely accept the oneness of man. And they would cease to measure others always in the terms of their differences in color. You know, the Prophet ﷺ said, لا فضلا لعربي على العجمي ولا للعجمي على عربي ولا لأحمر على أسود ولا لأسود على أحمر إلا بتقوى الله. That there is no preference of an Arab over a non-Arab, knowing that the Prophet ﷺ was an Arab, that the Quran was revealed in Arabic, that the Sahaba were all Arabs, that the Khilafah for the first few hundred years was all Arabic, and yet the Prophet ﷺ in his wisdom taught to us to this day said that there's no preference of an Arab over a non-Arab. And in his lifetime, the deen hadn't spread beyond, it hadn't even reached all of Arabia. And look at the prescience. He said there's no preference of a non-Arab over an Arab. And likewise of a non-Arab over an Arab. Or of a white person over a black, and a black over a white. And this is what the first time he experienced in the Muslim world. And so now he just made a call of da'wah to the entire continent of America, that you can rid yourselves of racism by embracing Islam. Now, it's something I come across recently, I didn't know, but because he was traveling to so many different parts of the world, I didn't know that he'd been denied entry into one of the countries. And why was I was not surprised at all to find that he'd been denied entry into France, of all places. France, one of the most Islamic, or probably the most Islamophobic country in the whole of Europe, who passed laws regularly, literally targeting Islam, who passed laws targeting the dress of Muslim women, who regularly expel Muslims even though they're born and raised in that country, by taking their nationality and sending them to the countries they've never been to before. So here he's writing to the Secretary of State saying that he doesn't understand why they denied him, and he thought that France was a sovereign state, but it looks like that it's another state of the United States of America. Anybody ever heard of the name Hoover? Yeah, Hoover. It's not that thing that you vacuum cleaner. It's not the same thing. J. Edgar Hoover was the head of the FBI. And the FBI saw Malcolm X as a major threat. he was being surveilled by the CIA and the FBI, and these documents were only recently released because they'd been hidden. And after a freedom of information request by some media operatives, they eventually got some of these documents. And in it, Malcolm X, you can see him talking about Malcolm X. It's the head of the FBI, do something about Malcolm X. You know why? They had this thing, this fear that a black messiah would arise and he would lead black people, 22 million of them, in America, and destroy it from within. And there was a fear that Malcolm X could be that man. And so he was heavily surveilled, constantly being watched. Remember I told you from that time of that incident at the police station, everywhere, particularly now, because Malcolm X's message now, he's no longer part of the Nation of Islam. The Nation of Islam, remember, they called for separation. They wanted their own state, but they did nothing to establish it. They did nothing to establish their own state. Malcolm X now, he said, I can't solve the problem of racism in America. I'm going to go to the rest of the world. I'm going to talk about America to the rest of the world. He planned to go to the United Nations and have America charged and forced by the rest of the world to implement laws that make at least black people equal. So now he was a threat. They saw him as an extremist. They saw him as one step away from being a terrorist. And so in these documents you can see that they talk about which mosques he's at, that he'd separated from the Nation of Islam, and that he'd been suspended by them, and he was suspended because he'd made a statement about the death of Kennedy, who was assassinated, but nonetheless they were watching him. And again, this is talking about that he's meeting with leaders like Martin Luther King, who before he might have in an indirect way referred to as an Uncle Tom, but now he's working with everybody. He's working with white people, with black people. He's not the same as what he used to be. And that is also becoming a threat. It's a threat. So the Nation of Islam now hate him. They hate him with a vengeance because he's called out Elijah Muhammad. He said that this guy has been having illicit affairs with women, and he's saying it publicly. So now he knows that people are going to gun for him. And the followers of Elijah Muhammad are fanatic. And at this point, unfortunately, even Muhammad Ali is. So Muhammad Ali severs his relationship with Malcolm, and Malcolm starts to feel alone. Alone from the people that he used to be with, but his family is close with him. He has daughters, he has about 6 daughters. He has his wife, he has those people who moved along with him. But he no longer has an organization with him the way he had before. He sets up a new organization called the Organization of African American Unity and the Muslim Mosque. One is for spirituality and one is for politics. But he's getting isolated, and he knows someone's going to come for him. And indeed they do. In 1965, this is just a couple of weeks, this is just about a few days before he's killed. You know, you see this picture, don't you? Sometimes you talk about Malcolm X, they show you a picture of him standing there with a gun, suggesting that he wants to start violence on the streets of America. But what you don't know is that his house was just firebombed. And the room in which his kids were sleeping, his little kids were sleeping, that whole house was burnt down. So he takes a gun and he's trying to protect his family. This isn't about him trying to start a street war. It's about him trying to defend his family. And he believes that it is the Nation of Islam that's after him, and the cover is given by the FBI. Sorry, the text is cut from there again. But one of the things he said is that it is a time for martyrs now. And if I am to be one, it will be for the cause of brotherhood. That's the only thing that can save this country. He said that 2 days before he was killed, that it is the time for martyrs now. I met Malcolm X's daughter a few years ago. She was in her mother's stomach when her father was killed, so she never got to meet him. She was one of twins. And she told me that they'd bought this place called the Audubon Ballroom as a tribute to the father, to teach about the father's life. And so now this place belongs, is part of the Malcolm X and Betty Shabazz Foundation, which is, Betty was his wife. And this was him literally moments. People are about to sit down. He's talking to some people from the press and answering questions. You see a guy looking towards us, right? You see this one guy strangely looking towards the camera. You see him again a couple of times. He's an infiltrator. He works for the FBI. And the movements that existed around that time were infiltrated top to bottom by the FBI. So the FBI had at least one present there, many others too. And then somebody comes in and throws a smoke bomb. And then 3 people come up to the front. 21st of February 1965. And they fire shots, 21 gunshots into the chest, left shoulder, arms and legs, including 10 buckshot wounds from initial shotgun blasts. So there's people coming with handguns, with shotguns, and they blast him. And so this is where it happened. And if you see, again in the top right hand, if you see in the middle right hand corner, you see that same guy who was looking at the camera before? That's him again. He's looking at the camera again. This on the right, sorry, on the right is his sister. This is just walking out after one of the inquests, I think. And then in the middle is his wife, Betty. And so it became, this was news that rocked the world. Everybody was talking about the murder of Malcolm X. And you can see there his body. And I said the gunshots that he had, you can see aimed right at his heart. Right at his heart. But make no mistake, he died in the defense of dignity, in the defense of what's right, in the defense of goodness, in the defense of justice. And Muslims are across the world to this day believe that he's a shaheed. وَلَا نُزَكِّي عَلَى اللَّهِ أَحَدٍ. Lakin we believe that inshallah he was a shaheed, because he fits all of the criteria of why he died. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, despite all of those shots, remember, that were fired at him, his face remains pristine. This was at his janazah. And you can see majority of people are not Muslims. The only other Muslims that would have been around at that time were the Nation of Islam, and they're the ones who are implicated in his death. They're the ones who killed him. And even, to be honest with you, to be killed by somebody with that twisted belief is an honor. That he was thankful, his family were thankful that he wasn't killed by a Muslim, meaning a Muslim. Though it was painful that he was killed by other black people, of course. And this was at his funeral. And before he died, he had a teacher, he had a Sudanese teacher who taught him about Islam. So he wasn't just learning from what he discarded everything he learned from the Nation of Islam, and he started from scratch, another rebirth. And this is where he's buried. If you wanted to know, subhanAllah, look at how he's buried. Look at the gravestone. There's no raised gravestone. It's just there on the floor. His wife died several years later in 1997. He was 39 years old when he died. 39 years old. A young man. He left behind, as I said, 6 daughters. He didn't have any sons, just daughters. But there was a movement that started. And it's really important we understand there's a movement that started in America as a result of the Malcolm way of thinking and not the Martin Luther King way of thinking. And this was the Black Panther Party for self-defense. And they started to organize themselves in almost semi-militaristic ways, the way that Malcolm had spoken of. And again, they talked about being organized, and they set up schools, they set up free school breakfasts for children, as well as defending people from the brutality, especially the police. So America, they have the constitutional right to bear arms. It's part of the American Constitution. But you don't often hear about black people carrying guns. It was always the whites. And they changed that. We have fundamental rights. We can bear arms just as much as they can. And I want to tell you something. Just a couple of years ago, a whole load of far-right militias came outside a mosque after some attack had taken place, some terrorism attack had taken place in America, and they turned up. It was the Ku Klux Klan, armed with semi-automatic rifles, looking really mean, looking like soldiers. It's their constitutional right in America to do that. The Muslims in the mosque were terrified. They stopped going to the masjid. They were that scared. Then they tried to go to a Nation of Islam mosque or temple. And members of the new Black Panthers, who are actually very racist towards whites, turned up with weapons, with machine guns and arms, and looking mean, some of them wearing Palestinian flags. The Ku Klux Klan didn't even turn up. And it just shows you in America the kind of situation that exists. Part of the black kind of struggle movement was to make a statement wherever they happen to be. And again, this is just a handful of years after, literally 2 years after Malcolm X, 3 years after he's been killed. The fist, the raised fist, the idea of a raised fist. This is at the Olympic Games where two black men, Americans, won the 200-meter race, and they raised their fist to show their solidarity with the Black Power movement, which was headed by the Black Panthers. As I said before, that's J. Edgar Hoover there. He started something called the COINTELPRO, where they started to infiltrate black groups and resistance group around the country, which had begun with the story of Malcolm X, but they now moved on to the Black Panthers and others, and there was a tension that was building up between the American police and law enforcement and black people. Martin Luther King was shot dead, despite his belief in non-violence, despite his belief that you shouldn't be confrontational. He was shot dead by a white assassin. That also was massive news, rocked the world. So you can see what's happening systematically. Anywhere somebody tries to stand up and assert the rights for black people in America, they are not only shot down, they're infiltrated and ripped apart, and their movements are destroyed. In 1969, one of the leaders of the Black Panthers, a guy called Fred Hampton, who they feared, there's a film just now about him on Netflix called Judas and the Black Messiah. That's basically, see the guy behind him in the red? That's the guy who infiltrated. And he was working for the FBI. They broke into Fred Hampton's room at night and shot him dead, unarmed. So again, anywhere there's leadership, anywhere there's thought leadership, anywhere there's a direction and vision, the people who are the leaders are either physically taken out or they're infiltrated. And look at these guys. Do you know what these guys all have in common? Anybody guess? What do these guys all have in common? Somebody tell me. They're all black. Yeah, true. Something else. They're all American. They're not all dead. No, in fact, they're all alive. They're all what? Ex-Nation of Islam. Yes, some, but not all. They're all the same person? No, they're not all the same person. Huh? They're They're all prisoners. That's one, but there's something else. Something I've been talking to you about just for a few times. They're all black. Bro, that's just obvious. They're all Muslims, yes. There's something else too. They're all former Black Panthers. They're all former Black Panthers. Did somebody say that? Okay. And they all were imprisoned for fighting or killing police officers. Some of them did, and some of them didn't. Some of them were framed. A couple of them, Sekou Odinga, I think Russell Harun Schwartz, are now free, but the others are all in prison. The most prominent of them is Imam Jamil al-Amin. If you do a search on him, you'll learn about his writings and his teachings. He himself was known as H. Rap Brown before, and was accused of shooting a police officer. The reason why the Black Panthers got into so many gunfights with police officers is because, as I told you, they had that fundamental constitutional right to bear arms. And to this day, you can see the different black movements. You can see so often they've been shot while they're running in some cases. So it hasn't ended. And one little piece of information I wanted to give you. Do you know how the police force began in America? Somebody tell me.
Rounding up slaves.
Yeah, say that again?
Rounding up slaves.
Yes. Rounding up slaves. Can you imagine this? The history of the US police force, the police forces, the first police forces in America, they were first born out of slave patrols. They didn't have police. The first groups of people who were given the power, the authority, the weapons to catch a escaped slave and bring him back. In fact, the right term they use is to render him back to his master. And that's interesting because the term extraordinary rendition or rendering was used to detain us and to take us to America, into Guantanamo and so forth. So the term rendition was first used against slaves. And the police force has a history. Why do you see so much hatred constantly happening in America? Because they are the inheritors of slave masters, of slave catchers. That's who they are. But nobody likes to talk about that. And that's why to this day, some of these men are still in prison. There's been a whole litany of books written about Malcolm X. The most famous of them, as I said, is the autobiography as told to Alex Haley. But there are many, many books written about that. Even his relationship with Muhammad Ali is an interesting and important discussion on many books. I mean, Malcolm X's book is now regarded as a classic, as a US classic. And there's a famous film made by Spike Lee called Malcolm X. If you haven't seen it, I suggest you do. Stars Denzel Washington. It is one of the most powerful films you'll see regarding that struggle. And there's even on Netflix at the moment a film called Who Killed Malcolm X, because one person who killed Malcolm X was definitely Nation of Islam. But there's two others who were actually arrested and imprisoned for 20 odd years, and then they were exonerated. They didn't do it. Somebody else did it. But the hand and the role of the FBI and the CIA is still big and still remains unconvincingly at this stage, and still people are investigating it to this day. So inshallah, the final thing I'll say on this is much of Malcolm X's life, if you look at it, 39 years, much of it was spent in Jahiliyyah and then in the disbelief or the twisted belief of the Nation of Islam. And just only in the last couple of years of his life, the last year and a half of his life, he embraced Islam, and he embraced it with a way in which you can only apply this hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. He said, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالْخَوَاتِيمِ, that actions, whatever actions you have, are based upon the last thing that you do. So I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blesses and rewards and grants our brother Al-Hajj Malik Al-Shabazz the highest levels of Jannah, grants him Shahada, and allows people to follow in all that is good that came from him, and to leave behind that which isn't. وصلى الله وسلم على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. جزاكم الله خير.
Any questions?
Yes, brother. Alaikum salam.
What happened to Muhammad Elijah afterwards? I mean, did he disappear? What happened?
To my knowledge, Elijah Muhammad, his movement, he died not long after. His son was known as Warith or Wallace Deen Muhammad. he accepted Orthodox Islam. He also played a role in Malcolm X moving across. Waris Din Muhammad, however, still refers to his father, or still referred to his father, as the honorable. That's the term they used to describe him. Now, how can you call him honorable? There was a big debate on this. Honorable in what sense? He's claimed prophethood, which is, he's a taghut. And then somebody else came along, Louis Farrakhan. And Louis Farrakhan continues to be, from that time till now, the head and leader of the Nation of Islam. Now, Louis Farrakhan, again, he's tried to move a little bit across away from the original beliefs of the Nation of Islam under Elijah Muhammad. Again, a very powerful orator, very powerful speaker, says it like it is, but there is still this strong sticking point. If Qadianis cannot be Muslims, Ahmadis cannot be Muslims based upon their rejection of the finality of the Prophet ﷺ, the same goes for the Nation of Islam, no matter how much good they seemingly do. Yes, very good question. So the question about Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali is a very, if you see there's a book called Blood Brothers, and there's a film called on Netflix, I think. Muhammad Ali became quite cold. Remember, they were very close friends. They were really close. They literally loved each other. He came cold to Malcolm X when Malcolm left the Nation of Islam and spoke out against Elijah. I have to say, for Malcolm X to speak out against Elijah was a massive act of courage. Massive act of courage to do that. And he lost so much, and one of the things he lost was the friendship of Muhammad Ali. In fact, in one occasion, they were both in a country in Africa, and I think in Ghana, and they both ended up being at the same hotel. And Malcolm went to go and speak to Muhammad Ali, and he ignored him, repeatedly ignored him, until he turned around and he said, "You shouldn't have spoken out against the messenger." He said, "And he don't want to speak to you." And he never spoke to him after that. Muhammad Ali, however, became a proper Muslim in 1980 something, 1981 I think, or 79. And then if you listen to what his daughters say, they say his father deeply regretted how he behaved towards him, because Muhammad Ali himself accepted Orthodox Islam and died on Orthodox normative Islam and not on the beliefs of the Nation of Islam. Yes, brother.
What does the X mean to Malcolm?
Oh, very good question, mashallah. Yes, I had meant to say that, but I forgot. So why X? Why the X? So remember we talked about how the slave master's name was forced upon the people, the African slaves. So a simple thing, it's a simple equation. He'd say that nobody is named Malcolm or David or Ian or John where we come from. Not originally, at least now maybe they are, but never used to be. These were not the names that were indicative of where these people came from in West Africa. So they say in algebra, the unknown quantity is an X. And I don't know what my father's real name was, or his grandfather before me. I don't know what our family name is. So we use the name X. And it wasn't just Malcolm who took the X. There were many other people. Even the guys originally accused of shooting him from the Nation of Islam also had the name X. So this was a thing as part of the Nation of Islam. But the X was because of the unknown. We don't know who we are. We're a people without history. Okay, inshallah, we'll end there. وصلى الله وسلم على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم سبحانك اللهم ربنا وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.